Nobody expected this relationship to break. Not the markets, not the factories, not even the politicians who built their careers on it. For nearly 6 decades, the border between the United States and Canada wasn't just peaceful, it was invisible. It powered the world's most integrated economy. And yet today, that entire system is cracking, not because of war, not because of crisis, but because one man believed pressure would always win, and another man decided not to blink. What you are about to hear is not speculation. It is the real-time collapse of the most stable economic alliance on the planet, and it is already moving toward your wallet. For 58 years, the US-Canada border stood as the longest undefended border in the world. That wasn't symbolism. It was trust. It allowed factories to stretch across 2 countries, energy to flow without friction, and prices to stay low for hundreds of millions of people. Global markets treated this relationship as permanent, unbreakable, until today. Earlier this morning, the stage was set for what Washington assumed would be another routine victory. Cameras waited in the Rose Garden. Podiums were arranged. Pens were placed on the table. Donald Trump was prepared to announce a deal he believed Canada had no choice but to accept. Under pressure, under threat, under deadline. But one podium stayed empty. Mark Carney never arrived. There was no signature, no counteroffer, no public argument. Instead, Carney boarded a plane, flew back to Ottawa, and issued a statement that may soon raise the cost of fuel, food, cars, and housing across North America. Trump believed Canada was trapped. He believed leverage was one-directional, but this was not a minor dispute over lumber or dairy. This was the mandatory 9-year review of the USMCA, the trade agreement that replaced NAFTA and governs roughly $683 billion in annual commerce. It keeps auto plants alive in Michigan and Ontario. It feeds energy into New York. It fills grocery shelves in California. Economists assumed the review would be procedural because the integration was simply too deep to unravel. That assumption collapsed in a single meeting. According to leaked details from inside the negotiations, Trump arrived at the final session with a demand that went beyond trade. He demanded control, a sunset clause that would allow the United States to cancel the agreement unilaterally every single year, a deal that only survives if Canada remains compliant. In effect, a permanent threat hanging over the relationship. Trump issued an ultimatum. Sign by noon or face a universal tariff of 31% on every Canadian export starting Monday. This is how Trump negotiates. Nations are contractors. Alliances are transactions. Someone submits or someone loses. But Carney is not a contractor. He is a former central banker who spent decades measuring power through capital flows, supply chains, and systemic leverage. And he understood something Trump ignored. You cannot bully the country that supplies your energy, builds your industrial inputs, and sits at the center of your manufacturing ecosystem. Carney's response wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was silence. His delegation packed up and walked out of the White House. And at 9 p.m., Ottawa formally notified the U.S. State Department that Canada was withdrawing from the review process. The agreement would not be renewed. The framework holding North America together began collapsing in real time. The shock you saw on television wasn't outrage. It was realization. Washington understood it had pushed too far, and the ally it depends on most had chosen to walk away. Some will argue this is political theater, that cooler heads will intervene. But the evidence tells a different story. This is not posturing, it is rupture. First, the leaked Red Line memo from Trump's team demanded access to Canada's Arctic waters, the dismantling of dairy protections within weeks, and threatened national security actions against Canadian aluminum. That was not negotiation, it was surrender terms. Second, the markets responded in a way few expected. Instead of collapsing, the Canadian dollar strengthened. Investors read Carney's move as discipline, not recklessness. Canada has spent years securing critical mineral agreements across Europe and Asia. The market message was clear. Canada has options. The United States looks unstable. Third, the border itself began to change. Reports from the Ambassador Bridge show slower crossings, intensified inspections, and mounting delays. Pressure is already being applied, but Canada is not scrambling. Rail and port traffic is being redirected toward Europe and Asia. This doesn't look like panic, it looks like preparation. While Washington tightens doors, Ottawa is opening corridors. So why would Trump risk detonating a $72 billion trade relationship that anchored North American prosperity for decades? Control. Trump believes economic size guarantees victory and that pain only flows outward. But modern trade is not a scoreboard, it is a machine. Pull one thread and the system tightens around everyone. In the auto industry alone, a single component crosses the US-Canada border up to 8 times before final assembly. Slow the border even slightly, and you don't punish Canada. You shut down plants in Ohio, Kentucky, and Tennessee. That's why executives in Detroit are now flooding Washington with warnings. If this disruption lasts even days, tens of thousands of American workers could be furloughed. Trump thinks he is applying pressure. In reality, he's pulling a lever attached directly to his own economy. Energy makes the stakes even higher. Canada supplies more than half of U.S. oil imports, much of it heavy crude that American refineries are designed to process. Any restriction or export tax would spike fuel prices overnight in key swing states. America First collapses the moment energy costs become the punishment, and Carney knows this. This is why the contrast matters. Carney doesn't appeal to history or friendship. He calculates systems. What he is executing now is strategic decoupling, reducing dependence on a partner that has become unpredictable. Canada has quietly built alternatives, positioning itself as a global resource power in a world desperate for energy, minerals, and water. By walking away from Trump's ultimatum, Carney sent a message to global markets. Canada is open for business, but not under threat. If USMCA collapses, the era of cheap goods in North America ends. Grocery prices rise, housing costs surge, manufacturing inputs spike, inflation follows. And beyond economics, a deeper signal spreads. If the United States cannot maintain a trade agreement with its closest ally, trust erodes everywhere. As Carney left the White House, a reporter asked if he feared the president's retaliation. He paused and said, "You can't tariff gravity, and you can't sanction geography. We aren't going anywhere, but we aren't taking. What happens next will not be decided by speeches or press conferences, but by actions taken quietly behind closed doors. Supply chains are already adjusting. Companies are already reassessing risk. Governments are already calculating who they can rely on when pressure replaces predictability. Once this process starts, it doesn't pause for politics. Factories don't wait for elections. Investors don't trust reassurance after uncertainty has been introduced. Every signal sent in moments like this echoes far beyond the present, shaping decisions years into the future. What was once assumed permanent is now conditional, and that shift alone changes behavior across markets, borders, and alliances. This is how stable systems begin to fracture, not with collapse, but with doubt, hesitation, and recalculation until the old certainty quietly disappears. Orders anymore. That wasn't a quote for headlines, it was a warning. Now the continent waits. De-escalation, trade war, or full economic fracture. None are painless, but one thing is already certain. The old assumption that North America is immune to breakup is gone. And this moment may be remembered as the week the most stable economic alliance in the world finally began to fall apart. If you're still waiting for breaking news to show up on your TV hours later, that's fine. If you're okay hearing what already happened instead of what's about to happen, no problem. But if you want to understand events before they explode, if you want context instead of noise, and if you want to know what actually matters while others are still arguing about headlines, then you know what to do. Follow this channel. I don't chase trends. I track power, money, and consequences. News doesn't slow down, and neither do we.